All right. Welcome, everyone, to Media Awards Episode 5. My name is Bassam Haddad. I'm joined by my co host, Mouin Rabbani, and three outstanding interlocutors, speakers, authors, scholars who have been following the developments we will be addressing in a manner that is exceptional. We have seen their writings and their commentary widely, almost everywhere, and I'm happy to introduce them. Hala Jaber, Maya Mikdashi, and Sana Saeed. I will provide a very short bio, but before we do anything else, I would like to say or ask, how's everyone?
We're good, thank you. At least I think.
معين انت كيفك؟
Doing all right. Thank you, Bassam. Yourself?
ماشي الحال. I'm okay. I'm like everyone else. So I'm glad we are here together. I would like to say that it is our honor to introduce or to actually host Hala Jaber for the first time on our many podcasts. People are probably sick of seeing my and Mu'in's face. However, it's been several weeks since we have had a Media Wars episode, so this will be sort of a rejuvenation of the program. We will actually start with Hala and move to Sana and then Maya. So let me just say a couple words about each person so that we don't have to go over the bios later on. Hala Jaber is a Lebanese British journalist, author, and former senior foreign correspondent for the Sunday Times. A six-time International Journalism Award winner, she has reported extensively from across the Middle East. She's the author of Hezbollah, Born with a Vengeance, and The Flying Carpet to Baghdad. Maya Mikdashi is an associate. Ahlan Hala. Maya Mikdashi is an associate professor at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. She is the author of the multiple award-winning book Sextarianism, and that's Sextarianism, Sovereignty, Secularism, and the State in Lebanon, out of Stanford Press 2022, relatively recent, and co-founding editor of Jadaliya. Maya sits on the editorial collectives of the Journal of Palestine Studies and Social Text, among many other things. Ahlan wa sahlan, Maya. Sana Saeed is a media critic, current independent journalist, and a former on-camera correspondent and senior producer at Al Jazeera Plus. She is the creator and host of Backspace and the Israeli Occupation Style Guide, winner of the 2024 Online Journalism Award for Best Online Commentary. We are delighted to have you all with us on this fifth episode of Media Wars. You can find all of the material on Jadaliya's YouTube channel as well as on PalestineInContext.org. I will not introduce myself and Mouin, but I am very happy to give Mouin the floor to start the conversation.
Hala Jaber, thank you very much for joining us, and indeed a welcome to all three of our guests. But Hala, I'd like to start with you and specifically discuss two recent developments. The first was an attack yesterday launched from within southern Lebanon across the Israeli Lebanese boundary by an individual. I think it was only one person who appears not to be a member of either Hezbollah or indeed of any resistance group, and managed to infiltrate into northern Israel or across the international boundary. And given that this is taking place now, I was curious, in your view, what this tells us more broadly about Israel's ongoing war on Lebanon and what it tells us about that.
Thank you for having me, and good evening, everybody, or good afternoon in your part of the world. I think this is quite an important development, not so much from a casualty point of view, because first of all, this lone wolf, if you want, was neither a member of Hezbollah nor a resistant fighter, and had no such training. He was just a Shiite individual whose family were displaced in 1978, after the 1978 war, and ended up living in the southern suburbs in Bir Abed, to be specific. And he's lived most of his life there. Obviously, he hails from South Lebanon. He hails from Merkaba, which is literally a few kilometers from the border. And he decided basically to carry out this attack on his own, with no training, with no sophisticated equipment, and just with a gun, a regular rifle. And he did go to the south. He had spoken to his friends a few days before and said that he was planning on doing something. And he spent the night in Merkaba, in his hometown, and then he infiltrated, spent the night in the valleys, and then infiltrated across the border into Israel, where he took to a tower and tried to engage with some of the soldiers. He was killed. The point is not whether he caused casualties within the Israeli soldiers. The point is actually this caused a huge security breach for Israel. But more importantly, it showed also that, the Israelis are always saying, we are going to finish off Hezbollah, we will wipe them out, we will make them cease to exist. This man's act actually shows that the mindset, there is a mindset amongst people, and you don't have to belong to an organization or to a fighting group to be infuriated by what Israel is doing, and to feel like you want to carry out a resistant act on your own. And furthermore, this act also shows that despite the fact that they claim that they have security across the border and that they're occupying the immediate, so they claim anyway, that they're occupying the immediate front line with Israeli border, they are actually, despite their security mechanisms, their radars, their listening devices, people are able to infiltrate and do something like this. This would also have shocked the northern community, Israeli community, because it also goes to show that they can never feel safe if such incidents do take place. His act yesterday is also being hailed here obviously by the resistant community, by the Shiite community, as heroic. But it allows others within that same community who are not necessarily fighters to think, well, maybe we can do something similar in the future. And this is where Israel is. It's a variation of your 7th of October, and as far as it caused a breach in security, and Israelis at the moment are trying to think, how did that happen, given we are spread across this border, or so they claim anyway, and we are occupying the front lines from Lebanon, and yet somebody who has no military background, no military experience, managed to infiltrate.
And following on from that, I'd like to ask you about, let's call it, another breach of Israel's security, and namely, this was an exchange that got much more widespread press attention, which is that for the first time since the April ceasefire concluded between the United States and Iran, Iran has directly targeted Israel. And more importantly, it did so not in response to an Israeli attack on Iran, but rather on an Israeli attack very close to Beirut. And the Iranians gave a clear warning that if the Israeli attacks do not stop, which again would be a violation of the April ceasefire, according to the text released by the Pakistani mediators at the time, that Iran would respond. And it did. Israel then started a number of bombing raids in Iran. Iran continued shelling Israel until that round ended. But it seems that Iran is trying to impose a new equation with the ceasefire, basically saying it will no longer tolerate Israeli violations of the ceasefire in Lebanon. And yet, curiously, this is something that is being rejected by not only Israel, but by the Lebanese government. So perhaps you could explain how that is all playing out.
Yes, sure. I mean, the again, Iran has warned about this since the so-called ceasefire, or since the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran and Israel. But it had always warned that, attacking Beirut is a no-no. It's a red flag. It's crossing a boundary. Israel has well, and then you had Trump, who also really pressured Israelis not to do so post the ceasefire, but also when the Lebanese started these negotiations or meetings in Washington, to show, if you want, good faith. And Israel, not wanting and not willing, but felt that it was obliged to heed to such orders, especially coming from Trump. And they hadn't bombed the southern suburbs, perhaps maybe once, and then they did again a few days ago. And the Israelis actually said there was no target, but we actually bombed a location. So in effect, they said we're just able to go in and bomb a location because, I don't know, we felt like it maybe, or whatever. But they actually admitted that there was no target, but they were just bombing a location. Now Iran responded. Iran is, yes, having declared it over and over again that one of the main conditions that it is negotiating is, or part of the conditions, and it's a main one for Iran, is for not a ceasefire, but for a cessation of war on all fronts, in particular Lebanon, I mean, after Iran, obviously, Lebanon and Gaza. And Lebanon is very high and very important for Iran. And that is what it's been trying to do. Now, the Israelis ignored it and bombed. Iran is trying to impose new rules of engagement, if you want, whereby any bombing on Beirut itself will bring about a response by Iran against Israel. Not necessarily Tel Aviv, but the northern parts or some military targets in Israel. And this new rule of engagement that Iran is trying to impose, Israel is very determined to reject, because Israel, as we know, and as it has declared, and as it has been trying to do over the past few weeks, despite the negotiations in Washington, is to say that the Lebanese front has to be split from the Iranian front. It is not part of the deal because it wants the freedom to be able to fly at will, bomb at will, and that Lebanon is an open field for Israel. With such a rule of engagement imposed by Iran, that will take away Israel's freedom to do what it wants in Lebanon. And this is causing a huge internal debate, if you want, within Israel, amongst the Israeli political circles and the military, because they are desperate and they are frustrated and they feel that they are being restrained and that they would like more freedom in Lebanon. Furthermore, if Iran actually wins this, I mean, imposes such a deterrence, what Iran is trying to say in the future is it's not just Israel that can just fly into any country at will and bomb it, just like it does in Gaza and Lebanon, but that after each one of them, Iran also has the right to fly over Israel and bomb it at will when and if in response to any attacks on Lebanon. And then you have the Lebanese government, which is like the most bizarre thing. I mean, there's a huge power actually paying a price for defending Lebanon, because if this condition was not part of the conditions, they would have probably mostly resolved their issues with the Americans a while back. But this is the one that's always being this is the point of contention, if you want.
The
And
ceasefire in
then you have
Lebanon.
and then you have the Lebanese government, which has nothing, no cards whatsoever to offer and to use, okay, when it's on the negotiation table in Washington against the Israelis, who are much better at this than the Lebanese, saying, no, we don't want Iranian intervention. Now, Iran is not, and they call it intervention, as if suggesting or insinuating that Iran is intervening in Lebanese internal affairs, whereas it's not. But then on the other side, you have, for example, the Americans intervening in Lebanese internal affairs, but you don't get the same response from the government. So the government is saying no to that, Iran is ignoring that, because again, Iran is not going to abandon Lebanon. And when we say Lebanon, well, Lebanon at large, but definitely Hezbollah and the Shiite community in the south, or the Bekaa, they will not stand by and allow it to be destroyed. So Iran is trying to impose this, and in effect, what this suggests is that the future will be these attacks and responses back and forth between Israel, Lebanon, and Iran. And the U.S. is in the midst of all this, because the U.S. is trying to say, well, hold on, we don't want a regional war, and we're trying to contain all this. They are unable to actually tell the Israelis, no, 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 and Israel is going to heed. And they are unable to take away that condition from Iran. And the Lebanese government, I mean, the Americans have tried to twist their arm as much as they can, and they're sitting in Washington, literally selling out the south of Lebanon in return for nothing. I mean, the latest deal was that Lebanon ceases to fire, but Israel can fire at whim at any time, without any repercussions. And that's what the Lebanese government is actually asking of Hezbollah or the resistance to do, which again is being rejected.
Mouin, I'm going to move to Sana. Thanks, Hala. I'm sure we will have more to share. Sana,
Yes, thank you.
yes, Sana, it's the first time we have you on Media Wars, and I don't know why, but I hope you will be joining us more regularly. And because it's the first time, I'd like to give you the floor to address what you have been opining on and writing and producing regarding the reporting on the war in Iran, and of course the war in Lebanon, and the continuation of genocide in Gaza, and to the extent that you find correct, how Gaza has been sidelined to a degree, and also Lebanon, if to a lesser degree, because it has to be, it's in the news in connection with Iran. So I'll give you the floor to address these, and then we will go to specifics a bit later.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and such a great panel as well. And Hala, that was such a great and necessary, intervention from you as well about with regards to Lebanon, because it's been very, very frustrating to see the coverage and the conversations around Lebanon, especially here in the United States. Also, please excuse me, I'm recovering from a really nasty cold, so excuse any residuals.
Saddam Tek.
But the but the coverage of Lebanon, of Iran, and of Gaza, if we even want to call it coverage of Gaza, because Gaza has unfortunately really more or less disappeared from any major imagination and consciousness, especially here in the United States. It's the only vantage point I can speak from living here. But there's none of it is surprising. And even when we see how Lebanon is being covered, it is not as though it is an expansionist Israeli war and genocide and displacement of a people from their land. What is it? 1.2, 1.5 million people have been displaced from South Lebanon. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, as of today, almost 3,700 people minimum have been killed. Almost 10,000 have been injured since March 2nd alone. This is not throughout the entire last 3 years, but since March 2nd alone. And so the fact that that is the reality for the Lebanese, and that is not at all really the way that the conversation is being and the coverage is being framed, is angering. It's really upsetting, but it's not surprising, because we've seen how coverage again and again and again of Arabs and Muslims, and specifically of the entire region, is always framed, especially over the last 3 years, right, through the lens of not just something that positions it as necessary for Israel's survival, or necessary for Israel's or for the United States' interests, but also specifically as though it is just something that is a footnote, really, right? And that the real impact is maybe Iran gets a bit more coverage, but I was looking at how Iranian strikes on Israel were being covered versus Israeli strikes on Lebanon, right? Every single headline, like news organizations were completely overwhelmed with headlines, US news organizations, about how Iran had struck Israel. And it was just interesting because if you were reading that, you would think that Iran did it unprovoked, as opposed to Iran doing it specifically as a response to the Israeli violation of terms that were agreed upon in the ceasefire, right? Include Lebanon. So that coverage, which again is not surprising because of how the U.S. news media has also continued. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Has continued to also cover, or did cover for 3 years, the terms and conversations around the ceasefire in Gaza, or whenever there was a ceasefire or a conversation about ceasefire, right? We were consistently told there's not a ceasefire because Hamas, when in reality we know that there wasn't a ceasefire because of Israel again and again and again and again and again. And so none of the coverage is surprising. It's just very devastating to watch. I think, like, as a journalist who has been covering the region for a very long time, but also, and from the vantage point of like U.S. news media, but especially as a journalist who's been covering it in the last 3 years, I think a lot of us feel this way, where there's an exhaustion, but it's not an exhaustion that's rooted in like a fatigue, but an exhaustion of like the moral freeze over all of this, right? That there's been so much violence that has been enacted against the populations of that region, specifically, right? Palestinians, Iranians, the Lebanese, and of course Yemenis as well. There's been so much violence enacted against them in the last 3 years alone, that we've come to a point where there's just no longer, it just feels like it's become a footnote. It just feels as though it's not really something that is on the top of people's concerns anymore, when it should be. Like, living here in the United States, these wars, these occupations, these ethnic cleansing, this forced displacement, it should absolutely be on the top of every American's concern. If you don't care about people over there, you should absolutely understand how that directly impacts domestic politics. People over here are very concerned about the rise of the fascistic politics and political landscape that we have in this country. Absolutely. And that's inseparable from the amount of violence this country continues to inflict on populations, especially in the Middle East.
Mouin, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you for that, Sana. And a further question I'd like to ask you is how, if in any way, this is playing out in the U.S. midterm elections, in the primaries, and on both sides of the aisle.
So it's been interesting to see the political conversation in the United States has, again, as you mentioned, both sides of the political aisle. It's really become a question of support for Israel as well. We see that more and more Americans. Obviously, we know that the Democratic base, especially the younger the Democratic base, the more critical they are of the U.S. relationship with Israel, U.S. military aid for Israel, and also just any candidate who takes AIPAC money. AIPAC has become like it's become completely taboo to be associated with AIPAC, even though we know that. Sorry?
Toxic, even.
Yeah, it's become extremely toxic, right? And it's become synonymous with being anti-American, is that if you're affiliated with AIPAC, you are therefore anti-American. And that goes across the political aisle. Like, we see that there are a lot of young, even older Republicans are saying, like, we're struggling to pay for gas. We're struggling for groceries. Why are we giving so much money to Israel? So we've seen that. Now, of course, pro-Israel lobbying, pro-Israel money goes well beyond APAC, right? And I think there's actually a little bit of a problem when we only focus on APAC, because when we look at and break down major donors to the Democratic Party, for instance, or to the Republican Party, they're not necessarily APAC alone, right? Individual donors. That, I mean, one of the biggest examples is, of course, Larry Ellison, who, you know, him and his family are doing the takeover of the U.S. news media and entertainment. But you know, they are one of the big mega donors to the Republican Party, and they're not APAC, right? They're not the one specific group, and so, but that does matter. The fact that APAC has become really toxic, as you said, right, to be affiliated with. And so that is playing into this, that people are demanding that their candidates, and especially progressives, but also again on the right, disavow Israel or disavow at least APAC and refuse to take that money. Now, I think a lot of what we're going to see is a lot of candidates, which includes progressives, right, who are going to be, I think it's easy to not take APAC money, increasingly so. And I think APAC understands this too, which is why you'll probably see more examples of them using maybe some sort of shell organizations or getting that money to people through other ways. And also, we know that APAC's biggest influence is not necessarily through money, it's also through political interventions, right? I think it was Massey, right, who said that there's every Republican, almost every single Republican member of Congress has a you know, APAC handler or whatever. And so traditionally, APAC's been much more interested in getting into, you know, the halls of Congress, getting the ears of the politicians, of the members of Congress and Senate. But so I think a lot of the people who are saying that, okay, we won't take APAC money, or I don't take APAC money, I think, you know, we're going to see that if they were to be elected, like, things might go a little differently. So it is interesting to see that people are fed up with APAC. I think people are also fed up. I mean, we know 63, 67% of Americans did not agree with the United States bombing Iran, right? The vast majority of Americans did not agree with that. It's because Americans themselves they don't want more and more and more war. They don't want more dead children. They don't want any of this, in addition to the fact that, like, they don't want to continue facing the burdens that they're facing economically, right? Because that's who ends up paying. It's not going to be the billionaires who pay for this. It's not, you know, it's going to be the American taxpayer. So I think it's interesting and necessary that it's shaping out in the midterms. That being said, I do think, unfortunately, one of the main things that's going to uh, we know this is actually going to impact the American midterms, is going to be the fact that, you know, people are just want to disempower Trump and the Republicans, and the Democrats know this, and because of this, they know that they can get away with not promising a lot of fundamental things that more and more Americans want, especially on Israel, on Palestine, on Iran, etc. So it's unfortunate, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how these midterms turn out. Obviously, I don't think that if the Democrats get the majority, that they're going to do anything. They've had the majority before; they haven't done anything, and they don't really show any kind of uh, they haven't shown any kind of hint of even that they what they will do. Instead, I think they're just focusing on, very inspired by Mamdani, I think they're just focusing on creating a message and an aesthetic of progress, and pushing aside the quote unquote democratic establishment, as opposed to actually, you know, doing anything substantive that their base actually wants.
Thank you for that, Sana. And we'd now like to turn to Maya. And Maya, what I'd very much like to learn from you is, there's been much talk of polarization within Lebanon, of Lebanese society, and that this has been enhanced by that this is being enhanced by the current war. So if we take that together with the positions being taken by the Lebanese government, how has this had an impact on domestic polarization within Lebanon?
And thank you, Hala and Sana, for your interventions. I follow you and follow your commentary, and I'm glad to be in conversation with you. Before I get to the polarization, I just want to sort of piggyback off of the last point that Sana made about this sort of place within American electoral politics of these wars. And I think part of what we are seeing is basically turning these forever wars and the genocide in Palestine into an electoral issue, into something that's about American elections, rather than driving a politics in the only country that can actually stop it, which is the United States. So then the sort of answer to the question ends up being wait till the midterms. And that is really dangerous, because that is also what the Israeli state is aware of as a deadline. So there is a real danger here of Palestine being turned again into sort of a metaphor for American politics, or sort of a way, what are they called, those things? A barometer of American politics, rather than just a site of devastation, colonization, and genocide backed by the United States in the only country that could stop this, which is the United States. And I think part of the danger of this precedent is actually how that might play out when it comes to Lebanon. Because part of this, early on, different spokespeople from the Israeli government and military kept saying, we're going to make South Lebanon like Gaza. South Lebanon will be like Gaza. These kinds of the impunity to commit these kinds of crimes of annihilation. They had so much impunity that it became sort of a warning sign, like an openly spoken political warning. And the danger is also here for us not to accept the forgetting of South Lebanon, the lobbing off of South Lebanon, either from the rest of Lebanon, from Beirut, in ways that, again, we are seeing, I think, much less of a focus on Palestine, and sort of, we have a collective responsibility not to normalize these crimes anywhere against any of the people of this region. And I feel that part of the danger of the warning to turn South Lebanon into Gaza means also to turn South Lebanon into a place where people forget their responsibilities.
I think
Terrible.
Maya's. Yeah, you're
Hello?
back. Your internet connection
Yeah, Maya, you
briefly
cut
went
off
out.
for a bit.
Okay.
So the
I have
last
no
the
idea.
last 10 seconds. If you can rewind, you don't have AI. No, I'm joking.
Uh,
Feel free
yeah,
to
well,
continue or recap.
okay. No, I was just saying that we shouldn't hear. Part of what happens with these settings of red lines is that whatever comes before the red line becomes gray, or becomes just sort of normalized as a space of Israeli state violence or expansion. And we shouldn't accept that in Palestine, or in South Lebanon, or anywhere in Syria. And that is a collective responsibility that we have to keep saying, like, no, this will not turn into Gaza, because Gaza is not how you are speaking of it either, um, through this sort of normalization of barbarism. Uh, in terms of the sort of internal politics here, or the internal strains of, I think that we are at a moment, also to think with Hala here, that there are severe schisms and divisions. They are not, as when I follow media, Western media, there's very much a framing of that the people who are against the decision of the Lebanese government towards capitulation and coordination with the United States and Israel, the country currently occupying, invading, and destroying Lebanon, displacing over a million people, 1.2 million people, about 60 villages completely damaged and flattened in the south of Lebanon. Uh, the way that a lot of Western media frames this is that the schism is sort of really sectarian, that this is about one community not agreeing with other communities. But actually, I would say that the people in Lebanon who reject this course of action or this course of direction from the Lebanese government is much larger than any one sect. And it unites people across different ideological commitments and different communities and different regions of the country. And this position of rejection is quite entrenched. It has a long historical, it comes from long historical experience and also sober geopolitical reading and positioning. And part of the danger is that actually both of these camps are very, very entrenched. Now, even though the community that sort of rejects the path of direct negotiation and coordination is a much larger than any sect, that does not mean that the community that is facing discrimination is the Shia community because of its association. And you see this also, repeated in media tropes. I think we've talked about this before, how they frame certain geographies in Lebanon as if they're sort of the natural areas that must be destroyed in order to, defeat or neutralize armed resistance in Lebanon, armed resistance groups, primarily Hezbollah. So, for sure, the question of political polarization and its refraction socially is on everyone's mind. It's incredibly important and it's incredibly dangerous because of the fact that the social fabric here in Lebanon is already and has been stretched very thin over the past 6 years through economic and political disasters and meltdowns. And also through, and I think it's really important to remember here that when we're talking about Lebanon, we're not only speaking about Lebanese people. So the people who are being killed and displaced are primarily Lebanese, but they are also Palestinian, Syrian, there are migrant workers. Lebanon is a country that includes many, many different national communities, different groups of people. So any kind of campaign of mass punishment will affect everybody, even if the weight of that is carried primarily by one community. So I think the danger here, and this is where a lot of fear sort of animates the question of what's going to happen internally, because a lot of people here are focused on the army and what the army will do vis-a-vis government's decisions and vis-a-vis Hezbollah and the Israeli army. But there are other fears as well that are, and the army has thus far shown no indication at all for any interest in trying to forcibly disarm Hezbollah or overtly collaborate with the Israeli army in the south of Lebanon or elsewhere in Lebanon. But I think part of, beyond the army, beyond these sort of large official institutions, there are more fears around social fragmentation. And here you have to think, if you are from the south of Lebanon and you are from the Shia community and you are being displaced and destroyed, your communities are being destroyed, your villages are being flattened, and then you're not welcomed anywhere you go. That quickly becomes a sort of existential issue, and that very quickly can flip on its head and is incredibly dangerous, and it's incredibly criminal to treat a community this way. So
Thanks, Maya. I'd like to ask you and Hala, and of course Sana, but I know that Maya and Hala are focusing and have focused with a laser beam on a lot of the issues in Lebanon. I'd like to ask you about the breaking point when it comes to what is going on between the Lebanese government, quote unquote, and Hezbollah. Of course, in a particular context in Lebanon where there is a split, a clear split, clearer than ever, actually, as a function of, quote unquote, empowerment of the anti Hezbollah factions by the more strident American and Israeli aggression on Lebanon and on Hezbollah. And my question is, where do you see this going, and where might there be a breaking point in terms of this effort, which seems to be futile, but it is actually quite damaging and is bordering, at least according to some reports, on the breakout of civil war, quote unquote. Not least in light of the meetings that are taking place between, I can't believe I'm saying this, but between the Lebanese government and Israel. Feel free to answer in any sequence.
Maya, you want to go?
No, go ahead.
Look, I think the danger is real, but I don't think we're at the point where that is going to happen. I don't think either side, despite the schism between both, I don't think either side wants to go down that road. I know for a fact, for example, that Hezbollah for years has prevented or made sure that their community does not go down that road. And I think on the other side as well, the president, whatever else people think about him, is determined that the country does not slip into that. More importantly, is the military, and the head of the military that we currently have is one who has already told them that, if you demand something of the military to the point where the military has to confront Hezbollah in order to disarm it, then we are talking serious issues here that could spark a civil war of sorts. So I think when you look at all three, in effect agreeing, though they're disagreeing, I don't think yet this is going to happen. Now the communities is how you restrain them as well, how you contain them, and it's always a small spark that could then develop into something. It could be a street fight or a neighbor's fight, and like Maya was mentioning, it's also people who are going into areas. I mean, it's horrible to have to describe it in such language, but this is the way this country is, so you've got Christian areas and Muslim areas and so on and so forth, and you've got a lot of displaced people, and they're having to go rent, for example, somewhere, and they're being told, no, we will not allow you, you are not welcome here, because your presence here endangers us. Even though they come with money, even though they are being asked to pay huge amounts. I mean, not your normal rates, because typical Lebanese, corruption is everywhere, even in something like this. So these are the little problems that could eventually cause something bigger. But so far, people have just also restrained themselves, behaved, accepted, moved on. And I think because the leaderships are advising them to be, there's wisdom somewhere. Despite all the differences, there is still wisdom that prevails amongst them all. This is not to say we don't fear it, and I hope we don't see it. I mean, I went through the first civil war. I seriously would not want to see this country go through another one. We say it in Arabic, تنذكر وما تنعاد. And people who talk about people who
recalled
talk
and not repeated.
Yes, and people who talk about it have no idea what it means on the ground.
Maya?
Yeah, I would agree with Hala that the danger is real, but it's not imminent. And civil war is I think it's something that, especially in a country that has experienced civil war, is spoken of in ways that are almost it's always sort of around the corner, but yet also somewhat abstract. Civil wars need conditions for them to begin. Those decisions, there needs to be a political decision to have a civil war and to pursue even any sort of skirmish that might happen and to escalate it into something like that. There needs to be the capacity to fight a civil war. Right now, particularly as the Lebanese army has zero interest, they know exactly the danger to itself as an institution, and they have no interest, and they will not, and they have given zero indication that they will enter any kind of military confrontation with Hezbollah, very wisely, partly based on its own experience of fragmentation during the civil war. And then finally, there has to be a will to fight. All of these conditions have to be met. And if you paid attention I can't remember the day, but I think Marco Rubio floated some plan about the United States training certain units in the Lebanese army that would then be tasked with this issue. Well, that kind of language here sets off alarm bells, also rooted in history of the South Lebanese army, and particularly of this incredibly difficult, once the army did fragment during the Civil War, it was a very different war. It was living really in it became a very different war. And I think the last thing is the memory of civil war, particularly for people like Hala and I who remember it, is very strong and is a deterrent, that hopefully holds. But most importantly, there is no political decision. There is no political decision for this to happen. There is no capacity thus far where you could see it happening in a way that could be described as a civil war. And I agree with Hala that part of the political decision is coming from the two largest political parties that represent the majority portion of the Shia community in Lebanon, and that is Amal and Hezbollah, who are still also members of the current government. And I think that should be underscored here as well. They have not left the government, and they are also thus far taking a political decision to not seriously put the government's future under threat. Or it's actually maybe not its future, but its current presence under threat.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Maya.
Yeah, it's also important just to add something. The new
Please.
generation, the old generation, the new generation is not a war generation. I mean, they don't have the training and the capacity and the mentality for it. They're the young, modern, hip generation. They're not interested in fighting. Whereas during the Civil War, they were all, very politicized. They had undergone, training in Palestinian camps, and they were all. It's a different mentality, a different generation. This is not available now. Now we're talking about a generation of partying and no offense to them. I mean, good for them. Partying in cinemas and malls and things like that, which was not available in the previous days. So this is not a war generation if we're talking about the people themselves.
لحظة هلا كيف البارتينج ما كان مش مزبوط أبدا in the 70s في لبنان بده يكون أنت كنت مهذبة كتير.
I used to party, don't worry. I meant it's still a different mindset, this generation compared to the people. Yeah, we used to party hard, but it was different. That's all I'm saying.
أحلى شيء إنه this is the only thing that was offensive. I was joking. Maya, I also want to say something. When you said Hala and I remember the Civil War, I just want to say that I also remember it, not least because it actually, quote unquote, started literally one street over from where we actually lived in Beirut at the time in April. Mouin, do you want to care? Sorry.
Yes, I mean
Can I add one thing?
Please.
I think something that people are not paying enough attention to, because there is obviously a fear of civil violence and perhaps civil war, but there is also, I think, a possibility for a growing consciousness of a sort of national consciousness that is against occupation an invasion. And that's also a social phenomena that we should be paying attention to.
It's a very, very useful observation, Maya. Thank you for that. And we're talking about the threat, the fear of civil war on the one hand, and um, uh, the perhaps reality of a growing national consciousness on the other. And those are things in the background, but reality on the ground is the continuing Israeli aggression on Lebanon, not only the bombings and the killings, but also the systematic physical destruction of towns and villages in southern Lebanon. And we now have this on again, off again diplomacy between Iran and the United States, with a leader in Washington who keeps saying different things, most likely because he has no idea what he wants. He doesn't really know what his own objectives are or how to get there. Given all these different equations, um, I'd like to ask Maya and Hala about where they see this heading in the coming weeks, particularly as it affects southern Lebanon. And I think then Bassam would like to conclude with a question to Sana specifically about the US context. Maya, Hala, over to you.
I mean, personally, I don't, in the coming weeks, and for a while yet, actually, beyond the coming weeks, I don't see a de-escalation. On the contrary, everything, all the components, and I'm not just talking about Lebanon, I'm talking Lebanon, Israel, including Iran and the US, I see a case of escalation. And definitely Lebanon, Israel will not accept this attempt to impose a new law of deterrence or new rules of engagement by
Can I
Iran.
just interrupt you, Hala, just to point out that from Israel's perspective, Lebanon is also the primary leverage it has to derail the US Iran agreement, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
yes. But Iran has been very clear about it. And look, Iran has used one of the most important things it has, which is the Strait of Hormuz, um, as a pressure point, specifically also about Lebanon. And that's how it got it included in the first place and continues. That's what I said earlier. Iran actually has paid the price for its stance towards Lebanon and intends to continue to do so, irrespective of what people think, whether Iran gains out of it, whether there's self-interest in it. This is besides the point. The fact of the matter is that Iran is actually standing or stood by Lebanon when no one else did, and will continue to do so. So personally, because of that, I see that the situation is going to be a case of escalation and de-escalation, but I don't see Lebanon de-escalating. I think Israel is going to hold back a little bit longer because it's being told to, but at some point Israel will go ahead and bomb the southern suburbs and perhaps even bomb Beirut to add more pressure. And when that happens, this is how the circle is going to happen. When that happens, then Iran is going to respond against Israel. Then Israel is going to respond against Iran. And this is the vicious circle that I see happening and will continue to happen for a while. So I don't. It's for me the picture ahead is not rosy whatsoever.
Yeah, that's clear, unfortunately. And Maya?
No, I agree. I don't see this de-escalating anytime soon. And I see it escalating. I do think we should expect that Israel will bomb Beirut and its southern suburbs of Beirut. And I think that, and this is an article that came out, I think, today or yesterday by Ali Hashim, where he said, part of what's happening here is that Lebanon is becoming the grounds upon which all of these different negotiations are calibrated. It's becoming the space of both pressure and drawing lines, and and that's in addition to these sort of long-standing interest by the Israeli state on South Lebanon. And when we say interest in South Lebanon, this is also an interest in resources, water resources, gas, and other. These are strategic interests that are very long term that Israel has in Lebanon, and that paradoxically, of course, Lebanon has vis-a-vis the Israeli state. So, but I think that part of what was really part of why this will not de-escalate anytime soon is also because the Lebanese government and the Lebanese president seem to be really, if you just sort of read it at the surface of their actions, uh, they seem to also have a sort of ideological commitment, or they've made a political choice here. Because if you think, if you are such a weak, you don't have any cards to offer in a negotiation as your country is being invaded and occupied and war crimes are committed on a daily basis, you would think that that country would use all the cards that it has, that it would try to act strategically. And acting strategically in this front is saying, okay, there is a regional war, and there are two major camps to this war, and both are expressing some kind of interest in Lebanon. Why wouldn't I hold on to all these cards and play them? And that would be the strategic answer, but that's not what happened. So that means there was a choice to act not strategically, which again, if you read it at the surface, means a kind of political decision was made, a political choice by the government and the president that puts them at odds with not only a large portion of the people here in Lebanon, but also a portion of people throughout the region. And that's one of the reasons why I think we'll definitely not see de-escalation. Even sort of whatever arrangements might work internally, that might have to do with sort of, different allocations within the state apparatus, rethinking a sort of national defense strategy, rethinking the army, what it might look like, what its different components might be, whatever, ideas that might have legs internally, that might have sort of a conversation that can be had internally for resolving all these huge divisions in the country. They don't work externally. And all the external things that are being talked about also don't work internally. And until there is some kind of space, not a consent, but at least on the same, even sort of to conversational plane, you're definitely not going to see any kind of de-escalation. In fact, Lebanon will be the last site of de-escalation, and it will not happen anytime soon. And that is not only, us reading a sort of political situation, that is also us relying on history and
That sounds
seeing
like a discussion we could be having in the 1980s.
right. But according to Hala, we wouldn't. The 80s were also a time when nobody was going out. There were no bars. There was no nightlife.
عملتي لنا مشكلة هلا.
يعني
That's the
ما
only.
إلا ما
That's one of the only
يعني.
good reputations عنا إياهم نحن.
Imagine a whole interview and this is the line that comes out. Okay.
No, عم
That's not
نمزح.
true, Mike.
We're
I used to
joking.
go
We're
out.
joking.
I know it's good to joke about everything. God knows we need it.
I would. We've kept you for an hour almost, and I'd like to ask the last question to Sana. And for those who are watching, right after we finish, Mouin and I will spend maybe 10, 15 minutes. We'll just go through the usual sort of a Twitter space and select a few pieces or X and just address them as part of the back and forth and the hasbara and so on, which actually is my first question or my last question to Sana. Sana, you and I and Maya live in the United States. Yeah. So, and we have a
Bassam, I think you're muted.
We have a particular sense of the conflict online, of the actual media wars that are taking place in this country specifically, and we have heard recently about the substantially increased funding that Israel and friends are engaged in for media campaigns, and of course for the purchasing of even more networks, as we will show after the conclusion of this segment of Media Wars. Larry Allison has, now officially commends some of the major networks in the United States, and of course, discussion of Barry Weiss taking over CNN is in play, and so on. So my question to you is, given this spike, which actually started this March, and in light of the what I call this question of mine from yesterday, which I wanted to ask you, and I put it together in a tweet. I see Israel loyalists plagued with two dynamics. On the one hand, they have funds to push their state propaganda, and on the other, Israel supporters are experiencing what I have been calling for many weeks now, an unprecedented meltdown in real time, as they see Israel's reputation crater in the United States, specifically hitting new lows with every poll. And we are seeing as a result a response that is very juvenile online in terms of calling people out, people like us who are critical of Israel's slaughter and expansion, calling us barbarians or Islamist barbarians, inbreds, anti-Semites, subhuman terrorists, and so on. I would just like to get your take on this blitz, on this media takeover, and whether you think it will have any material bearing on the slide of Israel's reputation in the United States, irrespective of how policy has not actually caught up with this, and as you shared, will probably not for quite some time.
So I actually have a piece coming out on my Substack called "Why Barry Weiss Wins," and
Can
in it
you
I
can
kind of
you can you tell us what the Substack is so people can take a look?
Oh, yes, of course. So my Substack is literally sanasaid.substack.com. It's called Views My Own. And I've been trying to do more long form essays. And a lot of course, my work recently has been the last 3 years revolves around questions with Gaza at the center of it, because I think it's very difficult to talk about anything in this country right now. And I don't mean this in a way that's like one issue, but really it's difficult to talk about anything in this country without Gaza at the center of it, because as people have talked about again and again, as we know, Gaza is really an inflection point in contemporary modern human history in terms of how it completely breaks our understanding of so many things, but also just so many of the quote unquote legitimacies of so many different institutions, and really the world order as it's been for the last almost 100 years, but especially after Sykes-Picot. But so in this piece, one of the things talking about is, of course, Barry Weiss, and I argue that ultimately she wins because what is necessary to actually critique her ascension, what is necessary to critique what the Ellisons, David and Larry, right, father and son, Larry and Larry's the father, David's the son, their takeover. Oracle, Larry Ellison is the second richest man in the world. He is one of the co-founders of Oracle, which is a software giant enterprise that helps power so many institutions and governments and whatnot. Has a huge stake now and it sits at the center of operations for TikTok here in the United States. And of course, we know that a lot of Zionist groups for a very long time immediately following October 7th, were talking about we need to do something about TikTok, right? Really reinvigorated the fight to ban TikTok. And then it became, let's take over and change this algorithm and fight, quote unquote, anti-Semitism. They've done that. They've taken over Paramount. His son, David Ellison, through his company Skydance, took over Paramount, which is now Skydance. Skydance Paramount, and of course they took over CBS and 60 Minutes and installed Barry Weiss at its editorial lead, and now they're in talks with. I think it's going to go through the merger of Skydance Paramount with Warner Brothers Discovery, and of course that would, and someone like Barry Weiss is in the lead to take over editorial for CNN. And I talk about how journalists can't really contend with this in the way it needs to be contended with, because it involves reckoning with the exact role that they play to create the conditions that have allowed someone like people like the Ellisons, but also someone like Barry Weiss to ascend to the position and power that she has. So it's not very, and yes, is all part of this tantrum that Zionists have been having, especially over the last 3 years. And none of this is new, right? We've been talking about Lebanon, during this hour. During the 1980s bombings, U.S. coverage, in particular, of Beirut, of Sabra Shatila, was incredibly sympathetic. It was the first time in the American news media that the quote-unquote Arab, right, this the broad category of Arab, was seen as not the aggressor, but rather as a victim. And the images were shocking. I mean, this is also the same time where we see President Ronald Reagan, in a letter to Menachem Begin, talk about how he's like, you need to stop this Holocaust. He uses that kind of language. And Zionists in the United States were so overcome with disgust for how Arabs and Muslims were being depicted as human beings that they created Camera. And Camera, of course, was dedicated to, fair reporting in U.S. news media on the Middle East. And really, it was a company or an organization that bullied journalists into pushing pro-Israel narratives and language and all that. So this is like something that's a very much par for the course for how Zionists in this country have acted with regards to the media. It's just now gone to another level with the Ellisons taking over so much of which is already, by the way, really consolidated, right? U.S. news media companies, it's not like we have 15, 20, 30 of them. They all are under 2 or 3, 4 umbrellas. So it's already so consolidated. So this further consolidation by a family that's also deeply ingratiated with the Trumps, with the Trump presidency and with Trump himself, is super worrying. It's super worrying. That being said, the dam's broken. There is no way that Americans are going to look at this and be like, you know what? Yeah, actually, Israel is great. Oh my God. No, we're seeing it more and more. Now, is this actually going to have a material impact on the ground where it matters? I don't know, right? As Hala was saying earlier, as Maya was also saying, right, where it really matters. It was Maya who was saying, it really, really matters that issues of Palestine, Lebanon, Iran don't just become slogans, don't just become kind of litmus tests or kind of, these aesthetics. Unfortunately, I do think they will be, because of how often American movements, leftist anti-war movements, have now been really successfully, are co-opted and made into just that. We saw that with, unfortunately, BLM here in the United States. But I do think something's broken fundamentally. And that's not just a trust in the media, but it's in how so many Americans understand their own government and just questioning that relationship that it has with Israel. So I don't know. Again, I wish I could say how that will change things materially on the ground, even here in the United States. I don't know, but I do think that, with a lot of progressives, a lot of Democrats think that they have, and I hate to always talk, I don't want to bring it back to the elections, but because I think there's something also so utterly dehumanizing about talking about American elections. But I do want to say that the Democrats think they have 2028 in the bag because of how bad the Trump presidency is. I think they're really underestimating how done so many Americans, including in their base, are with Israel. They're completely done with it. And there is no amount of news media that can be bought that's going to change that. Because what people have already seen, they've seen it. You can't unsee that. What you've witnessed, you will always be a witness to. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting, here domestically in the United States, it's going to be an interesting, and I think terrifying, to be completely honest, next 3-4 years.
Let me just say, Sana, because I, probably, I know I'm older than you, and I actually lived the sort of the 70s and 80s, following American politics, and then of course early 80s. I was here. Um, we've definitely had moments when what we are seeing was replicated in terms of Israel loyalists responding, and we've heard people like Pat Buchanan in the 1990s say Congress is occupied territory. But there's a difference between something of the sort and the kind of small spikes in 1982 during the invasion of Lebanon, and the structural, unprecedented change in public opinion. That was not the case in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. In terms of 67 to 75% and increasing actually of people having negative views of Israel. So I just wanted to clarify that this is not to say that we have not had instances of critique of Israel be mainstream or a response of the same, but we are in a situation that is structurally different in terms of the balance of power, in terms of public opinion at least. And yes, I do appreciate all that you shared, and Mouin and I have always shared that we don't think that this is reversible today. The question
No,
is the extent to which this will have policy implications. We don't know, and we don't know when.
I mean, Israel itself, like we were talking about APAC being toxic, Israel is toxic, right? Like I'm a very online person. And so especially in a lot of spaces which are occupied, no pun intended, by young Americans, and you see how they are just so, like, for them, Israel is just like, ew, right? And we see that Palestine, I've talked about this before as well online, which is that Palestine itself, and again, I'm not saying that this is like great for Palestinians and great for the Lebanese, et cetera, but I just, again, it's more of that culture, that real massive cultural shift that's happened, which is that Palestine has also become synonymous with a youth culture of coolness. And that matters in terms of, like, if you can reverse a narrative, because you can't, you really, really can't do it in this regard, because it's just too fundamental. And we see that all things Israel. I mean, look, there are people who are pointing out, like, hey, I was really enjoying this show. And then all of a sudden, like, why do they have to mention Israel in it? What does Israel have to do with this? Right? Like, people are noticing these things. And and so there's a toxicity now that's not just with APAC and Israel lobby groups and whatnot, but it's specifically with anything and everything to do with Israel. We see more and more even comedians who are comedians or content creators on Instagram and TikTok, etc., where they use Israel as the punchline, right? About being an American who's subservient, American politician who's subservient to Israel as the punchline. And people, we see that people are responding to it so much more. And again, I'm not saying that this is going to have a huge impact on U.S. foreign policy in the region, because that operates very differently than maybe what Americans' attitudes are. But I think it does matter when we talk about, when people are so worried about, oh my God, is everyone going to turn pro-Israel again because our news media is being overtaken by the Ellisons? I'm not so worried about that, right? I think our news media is about to become really insufferable, even like more than usual. I don't know if you saw, but CBS had a story today about like this brave man who opened up a burger joint in northern Israel despite all the rock. And I'm like, what are, like, it's so ridiculous. And someone had to tweet, they're like, ah, yes, a burger joint. Americans will relate to that. Like, yeah, let's publish the story. And the thing is that I think a lot of Americans, especially young Americans, are going to see that and be like, what is this nonsense? Because it is also just a weird story to have in general. Like, who cares about a burger joint really anywhere in the world, but especially like in northern Israel right now? So I think, it's going to be, again, the news media is going to become incredibly insufferable. I think journalists are going to be really insufferable about it as well, because they'll be clutching their pearls while refusing to talk about how they actively created the conditions that allow people like the Ellisons and Barry Weiss to ascend. So they're going to be clutching their pearls and talking about Trump and that as though that's the only problem. But I don't think Americans themselves are going to change on this, and I think we're really going to see this in the next couple of years as the U.S. election, period really strengthens and goes forward.
Can I just say, I would like to see Barry Weiss become the editor-in-chief of every U.S. media organization, whether television,
Me
print,
too. If we're
or
voting, me
radio.
too.
Let's
You know,
let's take the masks off.
what was really interesting? Scott Pelley, right, who was just fired from 60 Minutes and kind of went on this whole thing. I thought it was just really interesting. and I'll end it with this, is that he talked about Barry Weiss coming into CBS in 60 Minutes, and he uses the word massacre. And all I could think about is, oh my God, the ease with which you are able to use that word to describe your editorial changes. And you can never use that word for the Palestinians being slaughtered
Yeah.
by the Israelis
Yeah.
day in and day out. You can never use that word for, and I'm talking about before Barry Weiss, not after, before Barry Weiss. You never use that word for the Lebanese, the Iranians, or whatever. Anyways, that's and to me, that summarizes kind of even like some of the journalistic again, brouhaha over Weiss and the Ellisons.
And on that insightful note, we're bringing this portion of the program to an end. Hala Jaber, Maya Mikdashi, and Sana Saeed, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Media Wars with its focus on Lebanon and things related to Lebanon. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and we've learned so much from your insights.
Thank you again. Also, Hala, of course, Maya, طبعا Maya, but Hala and Sana for being with us for the first time on this program. We'd love to have you back. Shukran.
Thank you for having us. Love to be back.
Thank you.
Salam.
Thank you.
All right.
Now it's just you and me, Bassam.
We are left alone. So, Mouin, we have a few minutes, and I'd like us to go through some of the social media posts, yours or mine, or us reposting others, because from what I've heard, a lot of people actually enjoy this bit because it's kind of gossipy, but also reflects what's happening online to some extent. Are you ready, Mouin?
I'm ready when you are.
جاهز؟ اوكي يلا. All right, let me bring you in here. All right, so this is I'll start with this. This is John Mearsheimer saying it's not just Israeli leaders who support the genocide. You don't see any protest among the Israeli public. It's shocking. It's sickening. You have to file all this under the Nazification of Israel. There are like
it's
the Germans.
Not on screen, Bassam.
Sorry?
It's not on screen. Yep, there you go.
All right. Well, there it is. I just read it. And the reason I'm showing this actually is because we incessantly hear all sorts of Israel supporters and usually, people of a certain persuasion in the West bludgeon and blame people in the Arab world or the Muslim world for not rising up, right, against the quote unquote atrocities. So this was interesting in that regard, and I think I'm gonna play this because it has a portion that is quite interesting. Let's see.
These particular leaders who support this policy in the side of Israel, you don't see hardly any protests among the Israeli public regarding this genocidal policy. It's truly shocking. And when you look at what the Western elites are doing, they're hardly doing anything to prevent it. It's just truly amazing. It's sickening. I don't know what else to say. I didn't think anything like this would ever happen, but it is happening.
All right, to turn your stomach a little bit, this is a former member of the Knesset and former member of Prime Minister Netanyahu's party, Chris Cutt, number 10.
Every child in Gaza is the enemy. We are at war with the Gazan entity, the Gazan terror entity, which we ourselves established in Gaza, in Oslo, and in the disengagement. The disengagement that Prime Minister Netanyahu voted in favor of, that is the enemy now. Every such child to whom you are now giving milk, in another 15 years will rape your daughters and slaughter your children. We need to conquer Gaza and settle it. And not a single Gazan child should remain there. Let's stop telling ourselves this deception just to score points in this game between pro-Bibi and anti-Bibi. This isn't about left or right, it's about winning this war, and it's about justice. When will we?
I guess you cannot argue with that, Mouin, right?
I don't think I will. No. It speaks for itself. Nazis, pure and simple. It's precisely what German Nazis and others like them in the past have said. You know, if you don't kill the baby, which is a baby snake, it will grow up into a serpent that will bite and kill you. So kill them while they're young and unarmed,
All right, so I'll
and
move
kill all
to
of them.
another post. This is just a note from The Economist about a piece that they have. And I mention it because it's The Economist and because I find it very problematic nearly on most things. Most of the people that my unit killed were not armed. This is an interview with a former Israeli soldier who recounts his time serving in Gaza. And the reason I bring this up is because you're beginning to see this more and more in mainstream reporting, which actually did not support these claims when they were being made. Both include, that includes The Economist, New York Times, and so on. Any comments, Mouin?
Well, it's an unfortunate reality that truth is not confirmed until it's validated by a member of the genocidal army or a politician in one of the states complicit in genocide, in the Gaza genocide. Regarding this specific case, it's obviously a valuable document to have, but as I and several others have pointed out, if there is genuine contrition involved here, why does this individual insist on remaining anonymous? Why doesn't he come out and openly, publicly confess to his crimes, own them, seek accountability, and implicate his those with whom he committed the crimes, those who ordered him to commit the crimes? Give us names. Isn't that what accountability is all about?
Yes, and here is a breaking news from June 7th. By the way, some of this stuff is a little older because we haven't had this program for several weeks. Fisherman Muhammad Musa Abu Jiab was killed by Israeli forces at sea off the coast of Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip while he was just fishing. And the reason we bring this up is because it's just beyond what can be fathomable.
Fishing is a capital crime.
Yeah. Same thing here. This is from 3 hours ago. This has been discussed quite, widely online. This is the immediate aftermath of an Israeli soldier shooting a 7-month-old Palestinian baby in the head, stealing his life. These are the words of Gina Parsi. It shows that the car with the Palestinian family had stopped, yet the Israelis shot. So we'll
And never forget, Bassam, if you accuse Israelis of killing children, and particularly if you accuse Israelis of killing an unarmed child in the head, you're engaging in blood libel.
Yep.
Even if it happened, you're guilty of blood libel. Even if you have video evidence, you're guilty of blood libel.
Here it is.
I believe this is in Hebron.
Let's move to one of your posts, Mouin. Go ahead.
How is Netanyahu's bitch going to respond to this latest development? I believe that was in response to an issue that we spoke about in this program, which is the Israeli attack on the borders of the southern suburbs of Beirut, to which Iran retaliated by sending several barrages of missiles, primarily at northern Israel. And we have the answer, which is that yesterday there was renewed bombing of Iran by the United States.
That's another one of yours.
Yeah, Donald Hussein Trump will very soon need to stop dithering and take some difficult decisions. Time is running out for him and his bullshit act. And this is in response to several things. As you know, Trump is incapable of saying Barack Obama without saying Barack Hussein Obama, because, of course, it's an article of faith among his cult that Obama is a devout Muslim and all the rest of it. And this is also a way for Trump and his cult to kind of put down the Iran nuclear agreement as something that essentially gifted Iran a nuclear weapons arsenal. Trump's problem here is that the status quo can't last. He has to go in one of two directions: either very significant escalation with no prospect of certain success, or a diplomatic agreement with Iran that, given Iran's strengthened position in the Persian Gulf, is going to give it more, and probably much more, than it got from the 2015 JCPOA. And Trump is the supreme bullshit artist. Every day, oh, the Iranians are desperate for a deal. They keep begging me to negotiate. Their military, I've wiped out their nuclear program. I've wiped out their missile program. I've wiped out this, that, and the other. It's pure BS. The problem is, it works extremely well in his own country, but it's not really getting him very far in the Middle East.
Here's a rapid fire pieces that I will address. Jeremy Scahill: Israel intensifies the killing in Gaza as the world looks away. And I just wanted to show this because it affirms what has been happening and not happening in Gaza and not happening in mainstream media. And it's something that Sana talked about in our program. And as you know, Mouin, this is not new. It's customary for mainstream media to do this, especially regarding stories that do not bode well for the networks.
Yes, I've quoted in that article.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything about this? Anything else?
Well, I'll try to find my quote and read it out. If you just give me 2 moments, please. Let me see. What did I say? Okay. One moment, please. One moment, please. Here you go. I'll just read out my quote. There appears to be a widespread perception, actively encouraged by Israel, the United States, and those governments complicit in the Gaza genocide, that the October 2025 Israel-Hamas agreement produced a meaningful ceasefire, or at least an end to the killing. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. Although the Palestinians have scrupulously adhered to their commitments under the agreement, Israel's killings continue on a daily basis in attenuated form and have in fact been increasing in intensity in recent weeks. At least as importantly, the siege continues in a context in which Israel has rejected the proper fulfillment of every single one of its commitments under that agreement. Those governments, which like to refer to themselves as the international community, have been content to look the other way and pretend this is the most normal state of affairs in the world. End quote.
All right. Absolutely. And next we have the piece of news that CBS new boss Barry Weiss poised to oversee CNN editorial operations. Glenn writes, the planet's most fanatical Israel loyalists now own and control, or are about to control, Paramount, CBS, TikTok, Warner Brothers, CNN, all acquired in the last 2 years by Netanyahu's close friend Larry Ellison, right as public support for Israel in the US and the West collapses. And to which I responded with this piece that I actually read a part of in our show, that this is happening as a result of the something to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, some say 700 million and so on, to support Israel's Hezbollah in the United States in particular. And this, in my view, reflects these two opposing dynamics. Of course, these funds happening, pushing Israel's propaganda. But on the other hand, we are actually experiencing something that I have never seen before in the United States, which is a total meltdown among Israel loyalists online.
And it's
to the
beautiful.
point where they are responding at what I call here in desperate sixth grade level, Hezbollah casting all or nearly all critics of Israel as a monolith, as Islamist barbarians, inbreds, which is very popular. I mean, you write something about what's happening in Gaza, and they they just respond by asking you or me, in this case, if my mother had married her brother. Yeah.
Sounds like something
and then
an
you look at
inbred
their
would
bios.
say.
These are not bots or just people who just don't care and they're just mouthing off. These are not just quick hot takes. These are sometimes written by people who actually have jobs in the public realm. And I'm not saying I don't mind extremist views that are argued or presented as an argument, because we can respond to those. But this is the sort of level that we are dealing with. And of course, the subhuman is very popular. Anti-Semites takes the cake. There's nothing that you almost can say without getting that in response, which has become so emptied out. It's kind of like the word terrorist.
Become a badge of honor, let's face it.
Yeah. And you have also had your share with an actual author, Gad or Jad Saad, that you and it's really interesting that a person of his sort of background actually uses this material and these labels. And I don't, again, I'm not saying I'm not referring to problematic views of people who support genocide. Of course, we oppose these folks. And I'm not saying that, it's not acceptable for people to have an opposing view. It's just that the articulation of these opposing views are so juvenile and reflect that meltdown. They are just in disbelief that what they are writing is viewed critically by so many people. Because if you look at the actual comments on these messages, as well as on various programs, even in mainstream news, this is where you could actually identify this phenomenon of how they are having a meltdown. Because when they actually look at the response and how what they're putting out is being received, it's just pushes them down a downward spiral.
Well, this far right clown is in fact a serial fabricator, and a few days ago, I pointed out one of his fabrications that he had borrowed from some far right extremist, and he responded with an unverified report about some rape in Spain that was supposedly carried out by an immigrant, Moroccan immigrant. I mean, the report he refers to doesn't corroborate any of that information, and then says, "Why won't I condemn it?" And proving my point. This guy believes in promoting hate and bigotry against entire groups of people. So what if some rapist in Spain and Iceland or Laos or Nigeria is Muslim or Christian or Jewish? Do I really need to know someone's identity before condemning their crime? And if we're each responsible for condemning the crimes conducted by someone with the same religion as our parents, well, he's someone who's openly called for the public torture and public execution of people who kill children. I'd like to see him call for the public torture and public execution of the soldiers and the commanders who murdered the 7-month-old child in Hebron just a few days ago. Open invitation. Ball's in his court.
Next, we're looking at this headline. This is from Haddad. She basically she asked us to compare these two headlines where the New York Times left out those details on the accident. Tribeca Film Festival denounces pair who joked on the red carpet about rape, whereas even Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, writes, Tribeca Festival condemns Palestinian dog rape joke by Israeli film's producer. It's unbelievable how in the United States the cowardice, and I mean, forget the lack of professionalism. I mean, obviously this is like such an infringement on the profession, but the cowardice is ubiquitous. And you do see articles, I mean, in fairness, right? You do see articles that are more straightforward. But these are almost like the token person that CNN brings to a panel in order to say that they are fair, or even Fox. But in reality, the structure of the programming and the headlines replicates this example here.
Yeah, I'll take the Israeli press over the U.S. press any day of the week. I mean, it has much better information on these issues, not only because, they're speaking about their own crimes in their own society, but the U.S. press has this absolutely totalitarian attitude. You can't name the perpetrator if the perpetrator is Israel. You have to use a passive voice, if the perpetrator is in Israel. And Israel, perhaps because these crimes are much more accepted and are supported by such a large proportion of the population, their press speaks much more openly about these things.
Yeah. And here's Glenn Greenwald writing. I mean, this has been an ongoing sort of thread / topic when people are seeing what Israel is doing and the propaganda they're putting out and the impunity with which they're operating and the commentary on actual war crimes and the slaughtering of human beings. The comparison emerges with the Nazis, and it's been, of course, called out by a lot of people as anti-Semitic and so on. And there's been a huge response to that as well, including by Glenn Greenwald. There's nothing offensive about comparing the actions and mentality of Israel to those of the Nazis. What is offensive is demanding that one country and only it, which is Israel, be exempt from those comparisons because it hurts people's feelings or because it seems bigoted to, and so on and so forth. So, and that is a huge thread. And I've also commented. I had a long post on this question, addressing this comparison and highlighting whatever you would like to say about this comparison. Of course, these actions are horrendous of Israel, and those of us in this sort of company, do never minimize, the slaughter of World War II and the Holocaust. But what is interesting about what should be highlighted about Israel's genocide is that it is taking place in 2026 after the various international law conventions and institutions have been created precisely to avoid another Holocaust. They actually took it on to do this after that time. And in 2026, which is the most recent moment, it's been 3 years almost, 2 plus 2.7 months, or 2.7, I guess that's 2.8 months so far. And it is happening at the same time that Israel continues to claim that the IDF is the most moral army in the world. Imagine the Nazi Germany army being proclaimed by, what's his name, Goebbels?
Yes, but in fairness, the Germans would probably claim to be the most efficient army in the world.
But I understand. But what I'm saying is these things they stand out in a way that again, as I keep repeating, as Talal Asad mentioned about liberalism, they stand out that only liberal institutions, liberal in the real sense, not in the liberal versus conservative in the United States sense, can actually try to save the world by destroying it.
Yes. Can I just sorry, I thought you were
Yeah,
done.
go ahead. I'm done.
If I could just comment on Glenn Greenwald's post. He's half right. He's of course responding to an appearance by Hassan Piker, or is it Hassan Piquer? I'm not sure how his surname is pronounced. um, on on uh, on a British radio show after he and his uncle Cenk Uygur were uh, had their UK visas revoked, not because of any national security threat they were believed to present to Britain, not because of anything they said about Britain or its people or its government, but because of things they say about Israel. So, in other words, you can be as critical of Britain as you want, but if you're critical of Israel, you're out. But anyway, he has made this comparison between Nazi Germany and Israel, and and he was slammed on that in this radio interview. But what Greenwald is saying is half right, because he says what is offensive is demanding that one country and only it, Israel, be exempt from comparisons. In fact, Israelis denounce each other as Nazis on a virtually daily basis. I mean, listen to their parliamentary debates, read their media, listen to their television programs. They're constantly flinging Nazi and Gestapo and SS and all the rest of it at each other. I mean, if you remember, Netanyahu led mass rallies after Oslo, where posters of Yitzhak Rabin dressed as a Nazi were held up. What is impermissible is not. It's perfectly permissible to compare Israelis and Israel to Nazis. What is impermissible is to compare Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, of Arabs to Nazis. That's the taboo. But other than that, Israelis do it all the time.
Absolutely, and in fairness, this point is not lost on Glenn elsewhere in terms
I'm
of his
sure it's
writing
not, but I
this
just
on this
wanted to
topic.
clarify
No,
that for our
absolutely.
audience.
This is an occasion to address this point because I too, like many of us who are interested in what is being broadcast and written inside Israel, it's very, of course, always interesting how certain things are addressed in Western media by Israel and Israel loyalists in a way that. In an abridged way without addressing basically the other half of the story, which is what happens inside Israel among Israelis. And that's the point that you are addressing, I'm assuming. All right.
Yeah.
So this is next. This is just a way of looking at mainstream media and how they dealt with the killing of the baby inside the car we saw. The New York Times says Israel fired at a car. If the baby were on a beach, Israel would have fired at a beach, and so on. This is propaganda for imbeciles. This is by Bruno Macias. And the title, I mean, the headline is right there. Infant killed as Israeli military fires on car.
Yeah.
In the West Bank.
Please.
And so on and so forth. I mean, the opportunities to learn for a media class from the headlines of the New York Times and how they're being corrected by people like Asarad, Bruno, and others is really remarkable. I wonder if the next crop of people who go into government or the State Department or into media or into security studies for that matter or into political science, basically how they will be animated by the sort of infringements and hypocrisy that we are witnessing. This is now to something else, which is
briefly
sorry.
comment on
Go
that,
ahead, Tfaddal.
if you don't mind. Bruno Macias is a conservative Portuguese politician. I believe he's a former minister, member of parliament.
Yeah.
I follow him on Twitter. extremely worthwhile insights, and I think he just spoke yesterday at Oxford University. Also has written a number of very successful books, and I'm just mentioning him because in recent weeks he has increasingly begun comparing the U.S. media to the media of the Soviet Union, and basically saying, it's subject to, for all intents and purposes, the same ideological restrictions and taboos and things you may and may not mention as in the former Soviet Union. And I thought that was a very interesting comparison he's making.
Except in تأخر, he's late, because the sort of reporting, not least in the past, I guess 30 some months, it has been evident that this is the case, and I would argue prior, for many years now, with respect to certain topics, we have actually.
Well, in fairness to him, he's been very critical. I mean, he was one of the first to come out openly against the Gaza genocide among people of his stature, and he's been very critical of the media all along. I'm just saying this particular comparison, he may have made it earlier. I only first became aware of it.
I recognize this, but I say this also from a perspective of an educator who, in the 2000s, like before 2010, I have always been critical of this notion that if you have private media, you're going to have a free and fair media compared to state media, which exists in the developing world, which is
well,
the
you
accusation.
do. Barry Weiss says fair and free to say whatever
Absolutely,
she wants.
طبعا ما في حكي. But the point is, beyond simply, the comparison of countries, it's also the mindset, which is our quote unquote, or our as an American ideology, which is the free market. It's the notion that private is just, and public / state is always automatically unjust, and the media landscape in the United States completely debunks these assertions.
Certainly.
This is about well, how can I say this in polite company? This is about the fuckery that is taking place with respect to the 2026 World Cup in the United States, and of course Canada, Mexico, except the United States is doing all these things and kind of ruining it for the rest of the world, for the most important sports event on earth. Iran's World Cup, I mean, this is just an instance. Iran's World Cup squad has been notified they must enter and leave U.S. soil on the same day of their matches played in America, says Tehran ambassador to Mexico, and which is true. We know that they have to do that. Many members of staff have been held or rejected. I don't know. I didn't follow up to see if
they won't be
changed.
Permitted to accompany the team to its games in the U.S. Yeah.
And I think they are in Mexico. They're in south of San Diego. They're staying there for now. And then, of course, there are several other stories about how the Senegalese were treated, the Uzbek teams were treated when they landed, and of course the shameful rejection of the visa of a Somali referee who arrived in the United States, and he was sent back to Somalia only to receive, fortunately, a fine welcome by the Somalis back in Somalia. All right. I'll stop here and I'll go to one of your... Do you want to say something, Mouin?
No, I was going to say, you can say whatever you want about the host country, the United States, and the conduct of its government. And that's all well and true. But let's be clear, responsibility ultimately rests, in my view, a little less with the United States and a little more
Infantino?
with FIFA. And specifically its current head, Gianni Infantino, who is, to put it very politely, a slut for money and power. And concocted this FIFA International Peace Prize to give to Trump at the height of the Gaza genocide, to say nothing of his various other shenanigans. Truly shameful, especially, and this was something I was not previously aware of, is that in previous World Cups, in Qatar, in Russia, in South Africa, FIFA has set forward a whole ream of requirements that the host country is required to is required to implement and to respect in order to host the World Cup. And I also learned that in 1966, when the World Cup took place in Great Britain, the British government was considering banning the North Korean team from participating. And FIFA told London in no uncertain terms that if they do this, there would be no World Cup. But with Infantino and Trump, the US is free to do as it pleases. And Infantino will just ask to lick Trump's boots once again. Truly shameful. But we
Yeah.
already knew this about Infantino, given
Yes.
his
Which is
position during the Gaza genocide.
which and Platter, the
Sepp
his
Blatter.
predecessor, but Mouin, let's face it, this is not really an Infantino issue for the most part. I mean, Infantino has been corrupt and also was corrupt during the Qatar World Cup, but nothing of the sort happened in Qatar. These are government policies and that are being pushed by the same sort of anti-immigrant policy, plus, with like a certain flavor now regarding certain teams. Of course, the Swedish team wasn't patted down in the same manner as the Senegalese team. And we are seeing all sorts of so there's political issues of discrimination. There's corruption in terms of tickets, corruption in terms of hotel bookings, and then corruption in terms of how Infantino and FIFA, the leadership, is carrying things out. But a lot of these things were muted or did not even happen in Qatar, which is a country that everybody and their mother in the Western world was looking at with suspicion to see, oh, what will Qatar do, an Arab Muslim
And the
country?
same with Russia and South Africa, by the way.
Yes, but not to the same
But
extent
not
as
not to the
Qatar.
same extent. You're
Yeah, I mean,
correct. And just
it was
one last
unbelievable.
point.
And the most important development is that there hasn't been a World Cup, according to some of these same critics, that has been as organized and as disciplined and peaceful and beautiful, actually, as the one that took
Yes.
place in the only Arab country it ever happened in. Regardless
Yeah. And
regardless of all sorts of frankly contractors and so on who did quite a bit of the work. The point is, politically, there wasn't even a hitch.
yeah, yeah, and look, all your criticisms of the U.S. and its inexcusable actions with respect to this World Cup, those are all true. Yet I reserve my greatest ire for FIFA for accepting it.
Yes, but بدنا نحضر الورلد كاب. Unfortunately, who are you rooting for?
I've watched every World Cup from start to finish since 1974. On this occasion, I'm 98% sure I'll be boycotting.
Oh, you? Yeah, well, I'll be boycotting in spirit, but I'll actually be watching. I have to be
That sounds
honest.
like a good compromise. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going for Spain and Lamine Yamal, not least because of Spain's recent positions, but let's face it, I'm being a little opportunistic here. It's Lamine Yamal whom I'm watching very closely, and his courageous act, which we featured last time, in terms of carrying the Palestinian flag when they were parading around Barcelona. All right, and it is also, I have to say, 1974, the first World Cup I watched. I shouldn't be saying this out loud. All right, so this is one of yours, and
Yes.
yeah,
This character writes, if you don't want Israel to bomb you, don't bomb Israel.
he's
And
insufferable, Luay
I,
Ahmed,
I
and he just cannot wait until he tells us about his sexual orientation as a way of being persuasive. For some reason, he thinks this works.
and I responded, it seems a new talking point has been released. And the reason I said that is because within that same hour, most of the musicians of the Hasbara Symphony Orchestra were posting identical or very similar quotes. So it's obviously, someone had hit a send button somewhere, and you began to see them. And one clown went so far as to say, Israel has never bombed a country that hasn't fired rockets or missiles at Israel. I don't know. Was he referring to Qatar? Was he referring to Tunisia? Was he referring to Sudan? It's a bit of a mystery.
This is
Mike
yours.
Huckabee will ask his Israeli deities to keep the flames burning so he can use them to flip another batch of red heifer burgers. This is a post about the Christian Zionist cult, a very apocalyptic cult. Um, uh, and Mike Huckabee, also known as Mike Huckabee, is a prominent member of that cult. And these are basically people who claim that they've devoted their entire existence to saving threatened and embattled Christian communities. But there is no Israeli attack on Christians, on Palestinian Christians, on Arab Christians that they will oppose or condemn, particularly when you have someone like Huckabee with the weight of his office. So in this case, I also refer to red heifer burgers because in this absolutely bizarre cult, there's a particular kind of cow with not a single white hair that needs to be bred, speaking of inbred, and then it has to be sacrificed on at the Haram al-Sharif for, I think, Islam to be wiped out and replaced by the third temple, and then who knows what else is supposed to happen. But these people, I mean, they genuinely devote their whole lives to this. I mean, religious fanaticism of any sort is bizarre and impenetrable as far as I'm concerned. But this cult in particular, thanks but no thanks. And this goes back to a previous point we were just discussing. And I write, we've reached the point where Nazi Germany placed less restrictions on foreign participation in the 1936 Olympics than has the United States for the upcoming FIFA World Cup. Dirty, rotten scoundrel Gianni Infantino must never be allowed to live down his obsequious sycophancy towards the US leadership. And, I had written this initially as an observation about the very famous case of Jesse Owens, the African American athlete who enraged Hitler by performing so outstandingly in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. But, despite Nazi Germany's racial theories, he was, of course, permitted to attend and participate. I later learned that he said he was treated with more equality in the Olympic Village in Berlin than in the United States when he went back, where President Roosevelt refused to host him along with other U.S. medal winners. But there's another interesting tidbit here that I also wasn't previously aware of. Nazi Germany, of course, anti-Semitism was at the very core of its ideology, and it banned Jewish athletes from participating as part of the German Olympic team. But it didn't ban foreign Jewish athletes from participating in the Berlin Olympics. And I think some half a dozen Jewish athletes who were members of various Olympic teams actually won medals in Berlin in 1936.
Mouin, I'm curious. What are your views on Gianni Infantino? No, I'm joking. Okay.
I think he's the best thing that ever happened to FIFA. Why do you ask?
So here's somebody who was responding to something I wrote about the consensus on genocide, and he calls me and people who basically think what Israel did in Gaza is a genocide. He calls you people are pathetic. sure, lots of low IQ people fall for your lies. And he called us low IQ people who argue that. And my response, which I really wanted to, for the first time, to actually spell it out, that, and this is, I'll read it. Folks, you've got to, especially people on the right, you've got to drop this low IQ accusation. There are some really, really intelligent racist assholes and some really, really intelligent humanitarians. All that the low IQ phrase does is camouflage a host of shortcomings on part of those who deploy it across the entire spectrum. I mean, some leftists also say that, use that. Instead, try persuasion, evidence-based arguments, longitudinal comparisons, the application of principles across all cases, anything but claiming your detractor is not smart. We can't all be stupid on one side and all be smart on the other. Believe it or not, there are smart and less smart Zionists, just like there were smart and less smart Nazis. Same goes to any group of people. In the end, it's a neither here nor there tool. It's just so frustrating with this thing about low IQ. And of course, we all remember in the 1990s, the bell curve, or the, what's it called? The Charles?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean,
Charles Murray or something.
Charles, yeah. Is Murray a last name of most people who are problematic? No, I'm joking. Isn't there like a
there's
Murray
Douglas.
guy? All right.
But Bassam, don't you have to be inbred to oppose genocide?
Well, also you have to be apparently a Jew hater to oppose genocide, because this wonderful person, I'm not gonna I mean, it's on screen. It's somebody by the last name Reed. I actually wrote about the consensus. This is the same thread on genocide by several independent human rights organizations globally, including Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem. And the response is like, it skips everything. It says, we get it, you hate Jews and no history. And my response was like, also, I just want, usually I don't respond, but I did hear, Katie, this buffoonery no longer works. It's not 2010 anymore, where people can just say this word and just expect consequences. Clearly, I've said nothing bad about anyone based on their religion, but only based on their behavior. The day when you can just scream those words and have that be automatically consequential is gone. Nazis deployed similar tropes to get rid of their critics. Again, I advise my detractors to use argument. I mean, they could try to demolish what I say. I don't mind. But use arguments, persuasion, or debate instead. Or read what I wrote, because I actually, wrote the opposite of what she is claiming. And so on and so forth.
Can I just briefly respond? Oh, sorry. I thought you were done.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll address here is this idea or this event, of course, the Israel parade in New York. And Fox News writes, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani will not attend the city's annual Israel Day parade on Sunday, breaking with a tradition every New York City mayor has upheld since 1964. Yes, there are so many traditions in the United States that we very happily, gladly, and triumphantly
wasn't slavery a tradition until the 1860s?
And then, of course, I write how disgusting Mayor Mamdani is. How dare he misses the parade for the genocidal states? Are Israel's mass slaughter of humans and systematic rape dungeons not enough for him to celebrate what is happening to humanity? And then, of course, we learned that who joins the parade, Mr. Rabbani? Who joins the parade? Smotrich. For the love of whatever you're into, Smotrich joins the parade and puts all these people that were criticizing Mamdani in a tight spot. So, yeah, do you want to say anything about this parade question and the attacks on Mamdani? Whether or not one might have reservations about this or that decision that he has made.
They can't make up their mind if Mamdani is ISIS or Khmer Rouge. So they've decided he's both, the commie jihadist. And everything he does kind of proves he's a commie jihadist. So not attending a genocide parade for a genocidal state in the midst of an ongoing genocide proves he's a commie. I mean, the meltdown. I loved it. I loved it. I wish it had never stopped. They went absolutely crazy about his refusal to participate in this, and I have to say, they later tried to pretend no one knew Smotrich is going to be there, as if that was the only problem with this parade. Of course, everyone knew, but it just demonstrates again, how I think Mamdani, regardless of what one thinks of him, I happen to think quite highly of him. He really is a natural born politician. I think, many other people in his shoes, even if they had the exact same politics as he does, would have chosen to attend that parade as perhaps the lesser evil to their political careers. But he seems to have instinctively understood that marching in this parade would have really hurt him with many core constituents, and that boycotting enhanced his reputation and stature. Good for him.
We will end with your tweet, but first, a quick piece by Haaretz. If we are actually reading this by any other newspaper anywhere in the world outside Israel, of course, this will be a total. There'll be a total meltdown and outcry. Israelis are more genocidal than you think. The counter Hezbollah of Andre and so on and so forth. This is in Haaretz. It's actually a very interesting article, but it repeats and addresses the extent to which there is consensus. And I'm not talking about 100%, but I am talking about the polls in Israel that speak of rates from anywhere between 75 to 90, sometimes 95% support for what is going on and has gone on in Gaza with not just support as in, I'm clicking this button or I'm checking this box on this survey.
How can I
but
contribute
actual
type
public support. Sorry?
Yeah. How can I contribute type support?
ما بعرف, I don't know, but in a way, because of it's a citizen army, but it's really something that is coming out more and more as people are studying those things and making them available, whether it's in schools, from from elementary school.
Can I interrupt you, Bassam? I remember, beginning, I think, in the 70s, they would often refer to Israel's military as a citizen army, whereas in every other country, they would simply say it has mandatory conscription. What is a citizen army? Why can't you just say it has mandatory conscription?
And I meant to say all citizens, minus, of course, a couple of groups that I understand are exempt, at least
but every country
until
has
today.
that.
And then, this is something that is coming out more and more, and it's addressing various parts of Israeli society at all levels, and it's not something that we're saying is happening. It is something that actually is extant. It's quote unquote right front and center at the level of elementary school, high school, college, in terms of the educational spheres, and that includes staff, students, and teachers, with the same percentages, as well as social media, pop culture, the world of songs and dance, by the way, as well as art, and then of course in the political realm, it's quite evident, and one can easily see those things by a very quick cursory look. I will not continue with the Hasbara. It's just ridiculous. It's really not productive, and it's something that is backfiring every time
Indeed.
one says something to debunk critique of genocide or Israel's genocide. They are actually contributing to the repulsion or the response of revulsion by we're talking here American public. This is your last tweet, Mouin, or our last
Yep.
tweet before we sign off?
This is Zionist totalitarianism update of the week. Chicago professor suspended after assignment mentions Palestinians. I mean, it's, following on the theme we've been discussing this program and for longer. In this case, the P word, as the headline says, mere mention of the Palestinians, just you mention it, and it was a cause for suspension at a university, for God's sake, where you're supposed to learn and have your preconceived notions challenged. But no, in the land of Big Brother, that is the United States, certain terms are verboten.
All right. With that, we come to the end of this segment. We usually go on and on, but we're not going to do that anymore. I think we did this at a time when the traffic online was more vicious. Things are, I don't know how much you follow, but I follow very closely. And the number of quote unquote posts per person who's usually posting has dropped since, March and April. And even May, actually. So we don't have as much, and that's sufficient. Mouin, any last words before we break? I really enjoyed having this panel with
Yes, they were excellent.
Maya,
and I'm glad we were
Sana,
able
and
to
Hala.
focus primarily on Lebanon on this occasion.
Absolutely. Well, thanks to all for joining us. We will be back at some point in the next couple of weeks. And we will close. After we close, Mouin, I might give you a call just to learn about what you think about Gianni Infantino. I'm still not clear as to where you stand.
I'll prepare my position paper.
لو سمحت. All
All
right. Thank
right.
you all very much. This
Thank
has
you,
been a
Bassam.
Jadaliya production in combination with Palestine in Context. You can find everything on palestineincontext.org. Take care, everyone.